Hi love bugs, welcome back to my channel. I just got a haircut. Do you like it? Because I don't know if I do. So it's a little bit late, but I wanted to do kind of a yearly wrap up and do my best and worst of 2023. And actually I'm lying. It's not gonna be like a definitive list of the best and worst. It's just gonna be the ones that I want to talk about because sometimes you read a book and it's amazing and that's all there is to say, and sometimes you read a book and it's terrible and that's all there is to say. So these are just gonna be the ones that made the biggest impression. I think the most that I want to talk about. I'm gonna go kind of compliment sandwich style, so I'm gonna do a book that I like and then a book that I dislike, and just go back and forth until we're through the list. So to start us off, a book that I really loved was Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin. I give this book 5 stars. It was incredible. It is about an American expat living in Paris, and he meets this Italian bartender, and they hit it off and they strike up a romance, and it's so good. Just from start to finish, it's so good. It's very like emotional and charged because without telling you any of the actual, spoiler plot, from the beginning, the consequences of the storyline, but you don't actually know what has happened to cause those consequences. You know the effect of the story, but you don't know the story quite yet. So we're aware that something bad is going to happen, but we don't know what has caused this bad thing to happen. So there's a lot of like emotional resonance throughout the entire thing because we know how it ends, but we don't know what happened to make it end that way. And I really love it. It's told in this really interesting way where the narrator is like recounting the story. So there'll be this long period of him telling us the story, and then he might take a step back and reflect on his feelings or reflect on where he is in the present. And so it's kind of non-linear in that way. I thought it was incredible. I thought it was amazing. The writing was beautiful. The characters were interesting. The story was a really like fun time period that I haven't really read a whole lot from. It was just like, older Paris when they were still guillotining people. Oh my God, that's crazy. But I think that they did that for a long time. So, not that old. But yeah, I love this book. I highly recommend it. Yeah, super interesting, super emotional. I was emo on the bus reading this book. Yeah, from start to finish. Loved it. Yeah, that's all I have to say about that one. A book that I didn't like. Let's start off with a softball. I didn't really love Vicious by V.E. Schwab, and I have friends who love this book. I have had people tell me that it's so good. I really like A Darker Shade of Magic, her other series. Even I read it a couple years ago, so maybe now. I think the biggest issue that I have with Vicious is just that I'm too old for it. Like I'm just no longer in that target like YA audience anymore, and I just couldn't take it super seriously because of that. The premise is that there are these two undergrad students, Victor and Eli. Victor is our main character, and they are these super geniuses, and they're doing their theses and end up giving themselves superpowers, basically, is I think the best way to describe it. So Eli basically becomes like Superman, and he's this like hero of the city, and oops, I already said Eli, and Victor becomes a murderer and goes to jail. And so the story kind of picks up when he is getting released from jail. I think that in premise, like, this is so fun. Academic rivals, superpowers, but the cringe in this book was too much for me. It was just too cringy. And I think one of the biggest cringes that I had was just that the main character, Victor, I can like barely even speak about it. It's so cringy. The main character, Victor, does blackout poetry throughout the story and is just like sharpieing out pages of his parents' book and like writing these, these shitty little angsty poems. And it's just so like, if I had, and like, here's the thing is that if I had read that when I was 14, I'd be all over it. I'd be, oh, he's so angsty and mysterious and dark and a little I don't know. I would be crazy for it. I'd be like, oh, he's so cool. But I'm an adult. I just can't take that seriously. I think another factor in the reason that I was cringing so much in this book is just the fact that they're an undergrad. Like the fact that they are academic rivals having it out with each other in Bio 101. And they're not in Bio 101. I think they're seniors grad. The fact that you're like 21 years old and you're having it out with somebody in English 101, in intro to English. Like, that's so funny. Also, just the idea that, like, did this occur in, if you guys are in college or if you went to college, was there a top of the class? Because for me, that did not exist and does not exist. For me, there's no top of the class. I'm not in the same class as any of my classmates. Like, I'm not in every class with them. Maybe they were at like a really tiny college and like they had a top of the class. But for me, I haven't had a class rank since I was in high school. So what do you mean top of the class? Everybody's taking different classes. Also, just I didn't think that either of them. We're told that they're like super geniuses, that they're like these brilliant masterminds, and I just didn't think that either of them really acted that smart. And like I guess, arguably giving yourself superpowers means that you're pretty smart, but it wasn't really explained in a super intellectual way, and the things that they didn't really seem super smart. I remember like at the end, this is not really a spoiler, but Victor has this like master plan to get Eli back, and he's gonna fuck him up real good, and it just like barely it just like scrapes together, like barely works. There's some kind of Deus Ex Machina at the end where it just like happens to work because he has the exact right circumstances, and the entire plan hinges on so many variables that at any point, if you know even one of them were a little bit off, the plan would fall apart immediately. And I guess like you can argue that the fact that the plan did work, I guess I am spoiling the book, the fact that the plan did work and he did defeat Eli, I guess you could say that like that's because he's so brilliant, or it's because it's a book, and of course it worked. In real life, this would never fucking work. There were too many moving parts, like too many things that he didn't know, too many variables. If I were a super genius, I would not let my brilliant mastermind evil plan that I've been working on in jail for however many years hinge on this many variables. I would want as few variables as possible so that victory is assured. But that was apparently not the goal that Victor had, so I don't know where he was going. My fucking neighbor is mowing his lawn, so let me try to get rid of all the extra sound, but I just don't know if it's gonna work. Oh, actually, I forgot. I have one more thing to say about this just before we move on. I got queer baited so hard on TikTok that I thought this was a gay enemies to lovers book. Like, I fully went into this being like, oh, they're gay. They're not. They're literally not. So I'm just putting that out there. If anybody else was similarly confused, they're not even gay. They're not even like, at no point are they gay. And that's fine. Don't have to be gay. But I just like the intensity of the queer bait that I experienced on TikTok, and this isn't a note for the author, this is for TikTok. The intensity of the TikTok queer bait that I experienced made me miss the fact that it was bait. Like, I just thought this was, it wasn't even a romance. Like, I just thought that it was a gay enemies to lovers romance. And it was not any of those things. It was none of those three things was it. So, like, that was crazy. A book that I liked was The Monster of Elendhaven, and I actually read this book twice this year because the first time I read it on audiobook in the car, and I felt like I missed a lot of stuff, like toward the end especially. Things start happening fast, and I was missing a lot. The premise of this book is that there is this guy. It's just like about this guy. But he is immortal. He keeps getting into these rough situations. He keeps jumping off roofs and getting shot, and he just like survives. He just survives. He can't die. And there's magic, and it's this like vaguely German Victorian era ish town. I really liked the vibes of this book. It was very fun. I read it because the guy who wrote Hell Follows With Us said that this book was inspiration for the vibe that he curated with that book, and I really liked the vibe of that book. I reviewed it last year when I was incarcerated in COVID jail. So yeah, it has kind of a similar vibe to that book if you've read that one, where it's just like kind of like body horror, but not super scary, but like spooky vibes. If that fucking lawnmower doesn't, but yeah, I really liked the vibes there. It was kind of dark and mysterious and spooky and erotic. They actually were gay. This book actually is LGBT. And you know, I wouldn't say that it's romantic, because the couple is pretty toxic for each other, and it's not like abusive. It's just like definitely toxic. So, it is LGBT, but at a price. I didn't love the ending though. I didn't like. I don't know about the ending really. I wasn't sure how I feel about it. I'm not crazy about it, but it wasn't the worst. It is pretty short. Also, it's I want to say like 150 pages. Like it went by fast. It goes by quick. And I thought it was a good time. Yeah. So that's that on that. And then another book that I didn't like was Red Rising by Pierce Brown. And in the months since I've read this book, I've seen so many people talk about how it is one of their favorite books, how it's like such a great sci-fi, fantasy, whatever book, and it's just like such an incredible series. And maybe the series gets better after the first book, is what I've heard also, but I wasn't vibing with this first book at all. And, you know, I think that it also has to do with the fact that I'm just too old for it. I can't be reading about 16-year-old protagonists anymore. I just can't do it. I can't take them seriously as these like big gruff macho you know, strong characters. I'm like, okay, you are taking Algebra 2. I really disliked that this book used the dead wife trope immediately. I thought that it's just like, when did this book come out? First of all, let me check real fast for you. 2014. Okay, it was a different world back then, I guess. But like even then, to use the dead wife trope immediately, and then I didn't love the world building that went into this. Uh, but what really turned me off of the book, what really made me start to like not just not vibe with it, but actively dislike it, is the way that and this is like, I'll put some warnings on top. The way that the author just threw around references to sexual violence happening in this book. And really, I think what bothered me most about it is just the way that he was really using it as shorthand to show that the bad guys were bad. To be like, oh, they're so evil, they're R-rating people. It's just it's such a cheap, lazy way of making your villains seem bad, and it shows such little empathy or respect for victims of sexual violence. It shows such terrible understanding of what sexual violence is, and it really frustrates me when usually when male authors do this just as a way to show that their bad guy is bad and the good guy is good because he's against what this person is doing. Like it's such lazy writing, I think is what I'm trying to say. It's so lazy, and it's so somehow perpetrator centric, where you're focusing on the person who is committing the violence rather than the actual like gravity of what that violence is and its effect on people, its effect on the victims. And I just think that's bad. I guess at the end of the day, that's the word I'm looking for, is I thought it was bad. Yeah, and I know that maybe he does a fantastic job with it in later books. Maybe he is so good at writing about these heavy topics later on in the series. But in this book, I thought he did badly. And that's the end of it. Like, I thought that he did badly. I also don't know that it is appropriate to include that content in a YA book. And I assume this is YA. I know that maybe it's not. I don't know. Is this YA? Let me see. Yeah, it is. It's listed as YA. Oh, well, it's listed as YA and adult. So what's that about? To me, it read as YA. I don't think it's appropriate to include that content in YA books if you are going to do it so poorly. Sorry to bring the vibe down. A book that I liked was Annihilation by Jeff Vandermeer, and this is also a sci-fi book. It is about these four scientists who are each from different branches of their studies, and they're sent to, I think it's an island, and this like tropical island kind of, but it is not what it seems. And I don't think I want to say more than that because this book is pretty short and it's very like trippy. It's very like surreal, I think is the best word for it. It's very surreal. And you kind of don't really know what's going on for a while, and then at the end it starts piecing together. I thought it was really great. I know that there's a movie based on it with Natalie Portman. I don't know how accurate the movie is, but based on the clips that I've seen, I feel like it's probably not very accurate. But yeah, I really like this book. I think that probably I'll continue with the series. I didn't know that it was a series when I started it. I thought it was just a one-off, and I think it works as a one-off. I think it was great as a standalone, but maybe I will continue. I don't think that the writing particularly stood out to me, but just the weird science and like the weirdness that was going on was very interesting to me. I really thought it was good. Okay, let's find a book that I disliked. I really didn't like Sapiens, A Brief History of Humankind by Yuval Harari. And this surprised me. This is a nonfiction book. It kind of is what the title tells you. It's a history of humankind starting from like cave people, Neanderthal, right when humans evolved, and then coming up to the present, just all the way through. And I thought that was such an interesting premise, and I thought for a while I really liked it, but then it became so apparent that the author was inserting just like weird capitalist propaganda into it. I don't know if it is propaganda, but it kind of came across that way, because all of a sudden he would take a break from talking about something to be like, and that's why capitalism is the peak of human civilization, and that's why capitalism is the best thing that we have ever come up with. And it was like, can we stay on topic? Because we're talking about evolution of patriarchy. So can we just like stay focused for a second? I thought that was really weird. I read a couple of reviews that said that the research that went into this was not extremely thorough, and I kind of got that vibe too. Being someone who's not like a cultural anthropologist or anything, I kind of did get the vibe that he was being very non-committal with a lot of the theories that he brought up. And I was really excited for this book. I thought that it would be really interesting, but I didn't realize that the author was just going to spend the entire time deeply kissing capitalism's ass. That was a lot. That was uncomfortable at times. That was too much. I'll do 2 books that I liked now, because I actually read more books that I liked than I disliked this year, which is great. The first book that I liked was The Human Cosmos. Hang on, there's a subtitle. The Human Cosmos, Civilization and the Stars by Jill Marchand. And it is also similar to Sapiens. It takes us from the like cave people with cave paintings up to the modern day, and it's really just this exploration of how astronomy has affected human civilization from start to now. And it was so interesting, the way that our science toward like the science of astronomy has evolved, but also the way that astronomy has permeated into art and literature and social consciousness was so interesting, and I really loved this book. It was so informative and so in depth with a lot of its discussions. I thought it was so cool. Yeah. At the end, she gets a little bit less, maybe arguably a little bit less grounded than the rest of the book, but she starts to talk about the potential for human consciousness to be kind of like as an agent of the cosmos. She starts to bring up questions of, why does it seem like we have this intrinsic connection to the cosmos? Why does astronomy affect our civilization in such concrete and, intensive ways? And so she brings up the idea that consciousness is connected to the cosmos in some way. And she talks about how whenever astronauts return from space, the first thing they say is that the Earth is so beautiful. And I think that's so beautiful. Like that really that makes me emo. That makes me really emo. And I don't know. I don't feel qualified to speak on her speculations at the end about consciousness, but I hope that one day we examine those questions. Another nonfiction book that I read, just to stay on that topic, I really loved The Rise and the Fall of the Dinosaurs, A New History of the Lost World by Steve Brusate. And so I have no particular interest in dinosaurs or prior knowledge of dinosaurs. I just really picked this up because I thought it would be fun. And it really was. It was so it's written by this guy who is a paleontologist, and he's talking about dinosaurs. It is what the title says. And what I really loved about this book was, first of all, the author was very thorough with his knowledge that he gave us. It was written in a way that was very accessible. Like as somebody who doesn't have any prior knowledge, I thought that it was still easy to get through and informative, and I learned a lot despite not maybe knowing all the terminology. He was very clear with what he was saying. But what I really loved about this book was just the way that you can feel the author's passion for the subject in the way that he writes about it. And he talks about his own experiences on excavations and digs, and like the way that he has contributed to the science and the way that the science has affected him. And I just thought that was really, really interesting. I loved that little human aspect that he put into it by putting his own emotions into the work. I thought that was beautiful. I really loved this book. It was great. Okay, so this next one's going to be a double feature because I read two books that are pretty similar in concept, and I really loved one and I hated the other. So, and those books are Angels Before Man and Lilith. Angels Before Man is a retelling of Lucifer's fall from heaven, and it is also an LGBT story, but like mostly in vibe. Well, let me actually circle back to that. And Lilith is a retelling of the story of Lilith, a figure from Jewish mythology in the Garden of Eden, and she leaves the Garden of Eden. Let me tell you why I hated Lilith. So let me first tell you who Lilith is and how this book is marketed. So the book is marketed as a retelling of the Hebrew myth of Lilith. And I swear on my grave, it used to say Jewish, but it now says Hebrew, and maybe I was wrong, or maybe somebody edited this, and I don't know the answer, but I on my grave, I swear it used to say Jewish, but now it says Hebrew, but it doesn't really matter. So it's a Hebrew retelling of Lilith. Lilith in Hebrew mythology is not mentioned in Genesis, but there is an interpretation where she's there in one of the rabbinical interpretations. So there's this line in Genesis that says that man and woman are created at the same time. But when you actually read Genesis, if any of you have, Adam is created and then Eve is created. So they're not created at the exact same time. You can argue that they're just created at generally the same time, within the same window of time, but one of the rabbis wrote that this is evidence that Adam had a first wife that was created at the exact same time as him from the same dirt as him. And so the character that they came up with was Lilith, who is actually originated as a figure in, I think, Sumerian mythology. That might be wrong, though. And it's pretty common in ancient cultures to kind of borrow figures and adapt them into your own mythology. So that's where Lilith comes from. She's just brought in to fit this role. And in Jewish mythology, Adam asks Lilith to get below him, which is a euphemism, and she says no, and then she leaves the Garden of Eden. And that's all that happens. And that's it. And nothing else happens. Well, she actually is a demon after that, but nothing happens in the Garden of Eden. But in this version, in Lilith by Nikki Marbury, Adam asks her to do this. She says no, and he forces her to do it. And I think that it is so gratuitous and unnecessary and gross and not feminist and frankly weird to insert sexual violence into a narrative where it does not already exist. If you're adapting a story where sexual violence is not an aspect, I don't see why you would add it. And I know why. I know that she is pushing this idea of the oppression of patriarchy, and because she really, really, even before this happened, I was really turned off of the book because of the language that she was using. I thought the writing was not very good, first of all, but the way that she was presenting the Garden of Eden and Adam as being these like ultra patriarchal, sexist, misogynistic, just like disgusting versions of themselves, I thought was extreme and inaccurate and not feminist. Every aspect of patriarchy that already exists within the Bible is being exacerbated to this extreme degree in order to show how bad patriarchy could be. And I don't think that that is feminist. Like, I don't think that that is a constructive or productive method of showing feminism, is by just like making everybody in the world these horrible monsters except for your female main character and having her suffer more trauma than the character does in the actual mythology in order to push that narrative. Because I think that at that point you are making the argument, like the argument does become that women have to endure a certain level of trauma and sexual trauma in order to be feminist characters, in order to push a feminist narrative, in order to progress feminism, women have to first be traumatized. And I don't think that is productive. And I think that's dangerous, really, to push that idea. But and I know that you can definitely make the argument that existing within a patriarchal society does traumatize everybody, but it is taken to such an extreme here, and it is made so much more extreme than the mythology that existed thousands of years ago, that I just can't see the purpose in it. I feel like I was all over the place with that argument. And the thing is that Lilith is a feminist character. Lilith has feminist writings about her. Lilith has feminist scholarship behind her. And it is very apparent to me that the author did not read those before beginning the story of Lilith. It is very apparent to me that the author read a Tumblr post about Lilith and based the entire book off of that. And that is so frustrating, because it's like, if you are going to you are asserting yourself as this like authority on her story by writing Lilith's story out in words, publishing it. You are making yourself the authority on it. You are making yourself an author of this character in a very literal way. There are going to be people who read this book having no prior knowledge of Lilith, who now look to you as a factual and genuine source on who this character is. And if you do not do your research, if you make up things about this character, then you are making them true to those people. Now there are people who have read this book and think this is real, think this is genuinely who this character is and what happened to her and what she represents, and it's not. I honestly, I struggle to see how this can be a feminist interpretation if everything that the author is doing is afflicting more trauma onto a female character. If you are forcing your female character to undergo such a high degree of trauma just to present her as a feminist character, then I think that you have fundamentally failed as a feminist author. You don't need to inflict extreme sexual trauma onto a female character in order to present them in a feminist narrative. That makes no fucking sense to me. Getting a little more heated than I thought. And then she goes to the back to the garden, she sees Eve, and she's like, oh, she's ugly. I also noticed about this book that it doesn't really make sense within a lot of Jewish theology and Jewish philosophy surrounding the character. Like I said, there is feminist literature that exists about Lilith. Like, there are essays and interpretations of the character as a feminist character, and none of those are remotely reflected in this book, like, at all. And oh, I should specify that I DNF'd this book at 7%. So I can't speak to the book as a whole, but I do think it speaks volumes that this book was so aggressively bad that I DNF'd it at 7%. The way that she presents God, the way that she presents angels, the way that she presents the garden and Adam is not at all Jewish. And I read through a couple of the other reviews on Goodreads just to see if I was alone in thinking this, and it seems that a lot of people are picking up on the fact that this book is written from a Christian perspective. Um, and so it is interesting to me that the book is marketed as being a Hebrew retelling. I wonder why. I wonder why the author wanted to market the book as a Hebrew retelling when actually telling a Christian story. And I swear to God, I swear on my grave, I swear this used to say Jewish. But now I think that maybe she's gotten a couple of those comments saying this is from a Christian perspective, and now it says Hebrew. And we all know what she means by Hebrew, so, like, let's not pretend it's any different. But oh my god, like, this girl pisses me off. Anyway, but I think that it is so disingenuous to present this book as a Hebrew retelling or a Jewish retelling, even worse, because that is clearly not the lens that she's approaching it through. And I think that I have to assume that this was done with the intention to get onto the diverse book recommendation lists, that this was done with the intention to be non-Western retellings of mythology, non-Western characters. Middle Eastern, like, if you're going to do something like this, at least don't be so blatantly transparent about it. At least read one essay about Lilith before you write a book about her, before you make yourself her author. At least know who she is. Like, you're pissing me off. But okay, Angels Before Man. Angels Before Man is also a biblical retelling, and of course it is being presented from a Christian perspective. And the portrayal of angels and God is very Christian, but this book never makes the assertion that it's not. So that's obviously fine. Yeah, see how easy it is? I really liked this book. It is, I think that the writing is very purple, like very purple prose, but I liked it for the most part. And I thought that it fit the vibe, this being a story that primarily takes place in heaven, and in this, like, perfect world. I think does make sense that the prose is written in this way, and I thought that it was well written. You know, it wasn't distracting. I thought that there were some liberties taken with a couple of the characters that I was like, okay. um, I liked one of the things that I was looking forward to in this book was watching the spiral of Lucifer from being the favorite angel to being the devil, because that is such an interesting phenomenon. I've never read a retelling of that story from any, like, I've only ever heard the story, just like that. And so I thought that this would be really interesting just to see how that happened, the psychology of it all. And I think that it was mostly good, but I think that by the time, like, the final leg of that spiral didn't really make a whole lot of sense to me. Like, it was, I could see it for a long time, like the seeds were being planted for much longer than the spiral actually happened. And I think that's, I think that's accurate to how these things do happen. But it just wasn't super clear to me, especially toward the end, why things were escalating so quickly. Because we are dealing with characters who are so old, who are like hundreds of millions of years old. And so why would this happen within a week? You know what I mean? Um, I just thought that things went really, really fast towards the end, and that was crazy. But overall, I did like the book. It got like weirdly body horror at the end. It got like super body horror. And I guess if my review of Monster of Ellenhaven is any indication, I do like body horror in books. I think that it is so gross and scary. But I enjoy it. Um, but it was a lot. It was a lot. It was a lot. What was something that I was gonna say? I know I had something to say about it. Thought that I don't know if this is a spoiler. Y'all know I like to spoil things. Toward the end, there is like a lot of um, sexuality. I'll say there's a lot of things happening, and I thought that that was maybe a little bit weird to be like the final straw of Lucifer's descent is sexual in nature. I didn't really love what that says, but I do think it is interesting that the angels have sex organs because I was always told that they don't. But I mean, that's beside the point. Clearly, they do. Also, once the angels start taking sides on the angel war, and there's the ones who are on the side of God, and there's the ones who are on the side of Lucifer, they just like start torturing people. And it's like said very nonchalant. They're just like, we're gonna fucking torture this guy. How do you know how to do that? How do you know how to do that? What the fuck? Anyway, but I did think that the book was good. There was also I something I didn't like about the book, just to throw in a critique, keep it balanced. I didn't like how so we start when Lucifer is created. So for a long time, he's the youngest of the angels. And they keep bringing that up like throughout his relationship with all the other angels, especially with Michael, who is his like will they, won't they? And at this point, like at some point, Lucifer is like 200 million years old. So why do we need to differentiate their ages? Like it just seems weird to be like, oh, the younger angel is like blah blah blah. Like he's 200 million years old. I truly hope that is adulthood in angel years, because otherwise that would be. I'm a little uncomfortable with what's going on. There was just like a weird focus on his age throughout a lot of it, but it's like if you're if you are immortal beings that exist forever, maybe age doesn't matter after a certain point. After your first couple 100 million years, maybe we can say this is okay. Maybe we have to stop differentiating between people's ages. But actually, it's something that I did like about on the same topic is that when Lucifer starts to recruit angels to his evil side, when he starts to what is the word? Corrupt a couple of the angels, he targets the younger ones. And I thought that was really subtle. Like the author doesn't really draw that much attention to it, but he is very clearly that whenever he is talking to like the new batch of angels, whenever he's talking to the fresh ones, the kids basically, he is starting to corrupt them because he knows they don't know better. And that is really gross. That is really fucked up. And it is so good how that plays out. And just like what that shows us about him without actually like expositing towards us that he's becoming more evil. I thought that was really, really good. And let me actually contradict myself again because I also really enjoyed the character Uriel, who is the oldest of the angels and like what existed before any of the other ones. He's from this separate group that essentially got like taken over by God, and so that he is like from a generation prior to anybody else. His experiences and perspective are completely different from the rest, and I really did enjoy that aspect of the book too. So I think really what I mean by bringing up his age so much is specifically within like romantic and potentially sexual scenarios. I thought that was a weird thing to keep referring to. At the end of the book, Lucifer gets cast down, and all the angels who are with him become the demons, and all that. And there was this one character, Rosier, who I wasn't really clear on which side he went on. I was in my Goodreads review. I was like, I need to know what happens to him. Turns out Catholicism is real. Turns out I had just forgotten that Catholicism is real, and I can just Google this guy because he's a real character in Catholicism, and he's a demon. I was actually really upset to learn that he is a demon, because he didn't do anything wrong, and no, he didn't stand up against Lucifer, but I would still defend him. But I'm an apologist. Yeah. Anyway, but I think that the biggest difference, the reason that I group these two together, besides the fact that they are both biblical retellings, is the fact that Angels Before Man is very clearly told with respect for the story that it is telling. It has a certain level of understanding of the source material and respect for the source material, even though it does seem pretty clear that the author has criticisms of the source material and that they don't agree completely with the source material. There is a certain level of respect there and respect for the characters. In Lilith, I think that the author is. It seemed very clear to me immediately that the author did not have any respect for the source material, did not really understand the source material, and probably wasn't very well informed on the source material. I think these books are vastly different in quality of writing, quality of characters, quality of the overall story, the message that the story is trying to promote. I think that Angels Before Man is vastly better in all of these categories, but most importantly, I think that Angels Before Man has respect for the story that it is trying to tell, and that Angels Before Man has a message that it passionately is giving to the audience. It is a story ultimately that has a lot of care and empathy and love for itself, for the characters, and for the plot. And Lilith seems like a story that is told from a place of irritation and anger and hate. Hate. Yeah. It just seems like a very hateful story. And that permeates through the writing. And it is uncomfortable to see such hatred being portrayed as if it is a Jewish story when it isn't. And that is my opinion on those two books. Let's talk about a book that I liked. I loved The Radium Girls by Kate Moore. It is also nonfiction. I guess I read a lot of nonfiction this year. I didn't really notice that. But it is about the factory watchmakers in the 1920s, when radium paint was first started to be used. So they didn't really know what radium is and how dangerous it is. So these girls, these factory girls in the watchmaking factory, were painting numbers onto watch dials using radium paint because it glows in the dark, so you can read it at night. And it's this like hot, trendy new thing. It's super fun. It's super like exciting because this new technology basically. And they're told by the factory owners that in order to get really, really fine tips on their brushes and really, really close detail, they should put the brush in their mouth and make the bristles stick together. And so for years, these girls are ingesting radium for years. And the book is really about the effects of that on their bodies, like the medical effects that this has on them, and also just about the industry and how at some point the factory owners knew that this was causing the girls harm and didn't stop them. And it is so awful what happened to them, but it is also so interesting to see it's really interesting to see the development of that, and also just to see the way that the factory treats them, the way that the girls were treated, the way that they interacted with each other in the radium. But I mean, of course, the most the thing that sticks with me the most is just the medical effects that these women suffered through. It is so awful, but it is so informative and so interesting, and so I think really important to seeing just like the way that workers were treated back then, and honestly, the way that workers continue to be treated in a lot of industries is really important. And yeah, I really loved this book. It was super, super interesting. I highly recommend it, but not if you were squeamish about medical things. I didn't love Rouge by Mona Awad. I've liked a lot of Mona Awad's books in the past. I really liked Bunny. I liked All's Well. Rouge did not do it for me. Rouge is about this girl named Belle, and her mom has recently passed away, so she goes back to her childhood house to basically just like get her mom's stuff out, and weird things happen, and that's just kind of how Mona Awad's books are. It's just that like this is kind of weird. I guess that's kind of all I can tell you without getting into spoilers, because I feel like a lot of it is spoilers. Just at some point it kind of felt like I was reading the exact same scene over and over again. Like every scene was just red, mirrors, Tom Cruise, red, roses, French. And honestly, I didn't even read the last like 20 pages of this book because I just did not fucking care. Like, this book is about 400 pages. I think it could have and should have been 200. And that's kind of always been my criticism of Mona Awad's work, is just that I feel like it's a little bit too long to be efficient in storytelling. Like, I think that she goes past the point where the story is being efficiently told, and at some point it starts working against her. Like Bunny, I really liked Bunny. I think it could have been at least like 75, 50 pages shorter, you know? Because at some point, if you're just going to keep going on, you're going to lose a little bit of that tension. And this book went on for so long that by the end I did not care what happened. And so like it felt like the same scene was getting repeated over and over. I also thought that the messaging with this book clearly, oh, I forgot to say, there is like this really intense messaging about like over, what would you even call it? Like being obsessed with skincare and beauty regimens and stuff. And also because the main character is mixed race, like how her skin color affects the way that she views herself as beautiful. And I just thought that that message was being hammered in so hard and with absolutely no subtlety or nuance, that it was just not even, I don't, it just like wasn't even something that was interesting to read anymore, because it felt like I was just getting told the same thing over and over, when like I would have got it the first time, and I also would have got it if it was a little bit more subtle. This was my least favorite of Mona Awad's work, and I just didn't really vibe with it. I don't know. A book that I liked was Dead Souls by Nikolai Gogol. This is a Russian book in translation, and I thought it was really funny. Like, I thought that I wasn't really expecting it to be so funny, but I genuinely was like entertained the entire time. It's about this guy who is going around, it's in like feudal Russia, I think is what you would call it, and so he's going around all the different like lords. Hang on, let me look at what word the description used, because I feel like I'm using too many British words. Okay, it's actually serfdom, not feudaldom. I don't actually know what the difference is, but the serfs. So he goes to all the landowners and he asks them if he can buy the dead serfs off of their census list. And I think it is really funny, because every time somebody is like, why the fuck would you want to do that, he gets so irritated, and he's like, well, why are you asked? Like, why do you have to ask? Isn't it my business? Step off. It's like, you're doing something weird. They're obviously gonna ask. Yeah, I thought this was really, I thought this was a really fun book. It was really like weird, kind of eccentric read.
Yeah, I thought it was fun. Sometimes, first of all, sometimes the author will like break the fourth wall, which I thought was fun, and then other times the manuscript seems to be missing pages. There, I think that's what I remember. Yeah, is that there will just be like pages missing, and then I think also the ending is missing. So it's just it'll just be like manuscript ends here. It's like, oh. And I thought that was fun. I really liked the fourth wall breaks. I really liked the inclusion of just like weird manuscript things. I thought it was fun. I recommend. Yeah. So those are the books that I read in 2023, and I hope to bring you more videos in 2024 than I did in 2023. I know you guys are just fiending to know if I'm going to review the third book in Olivia Blake's Atlas 6 trilogy, and to all of my concerned fans, I have to say, obviously. Do I look like a quitter? I'm two books deep. I'm not stopping now. As much as I do like to critique her work, I also have to say that I need to know what happens. So, yeah. So I hope that you enjoyed this video. I hope that maybe you guys can leave me some recommendations for this year. And also, if you agree or disagree about any of the books that I talked about, please let me know in the comments. I would love to chat about them with you. And yeah, that's all I have to say. So, goodbye.